Hello, slimes and non-slimes alike. Rosie here, and I have been very, very excited for the Judgment's arrival to Dead by Daylight. So much so that for like 10 minutes on stream, I did nothing except talk about how I thought that the Judgment would play. Technically, I spent more than 10 minutes going over that, actually. I spent like an hour talking about the Judgment from my 2 hour stream. So I've decided to go ahead and take the most cohesive part of that rambling and decided to turn it into a video. And then I decided to go ahead and slap on some trapper footage on top of it, since most of the footage was just me messing around in the menus. But that being said, I do hope you all enjoy, and I will hopefully see you all next time. Cheerio!
It basically what I'm saying is like the Judgment is interesting because they can't just exile every survivor, unlike Pyramid Head with his cages. Pyramid Head has no downside to caging their survivors. There's like 3 scenarios in total where caging is a bad idea, and that's generally balanced by the fact that Pyramid Head cannot guarantee that he can cage every survivor he comes across, because it requires them to walk into his trails, which they can prevent simply by like crouch walking through it or just avoiding them entirely. The Judgment is different, because the prerequisite to exiling a survivor is identical to the prerequisite as to why you want to avoid exiling them. Let me explain. So, when you hit a survivor with Ray of Retribution, you inflict them with sin. When they are put into the dying state, if they are inflicted with sin, you are able to then exile them, which has many of the same benefits as Pyramid Head's cages, being able to circumvent pallet and flashlight saves, being able to circumvent anti-tunnel perks like Decisive Strike and Dead Hard, and, you know, saving you a lot of time having to pick up, move, and hook the survivor in question. However, the trade-off here is that exiling multiple survivors, is just a bad idea, because what you end up with is a killer who, upon exiling multiple survivors, just kills their macro pressure. What I mean by this is, in order to understand this, you have to understand how like general killer macro pressure works when they have multiple hooks going on. Say I have 2 survivors caged as Pyramid Head, and I find another survivor working a generator. The 4th survivor has to waste time going to get the first person out of the cage. They do that, they heal, and then one of them can hop on a generator, and then the other one has to go get the final guy, has to get like the first guy caged. During that time, I could have potentially downed the person I found and get them into a cage as well, which resets the scenario. Or if I don't, then it takes them like a minute before all 3 of the remaining survivors are able to get back onto generators at like full health. So having multiple survivors caged or hooked is like a big time sink for them in order for them to recover. The same doesn't apply to the Judgment. Since saving one survivor from exile saves all of them from exile, what ends up happening is you have 2 people in exile, you potentially find a 3rd guy, and then the 4th guy goes and gets the save on the remaining 2 survivors, and then they all 3 can immediately hop onto a generator. As opposed to Pyramid Head, where the first guy gets the uncage, and then they heal, and then one of them can go hop on a generator, and then they uncage, they heal, and then all 3 of them do. You just skip to like the final step on the Judgment. There is no step 1, step 2 with the Judgment. It's just step 1, get on gen. So that's the trade-off for the Judgment. You have the ability to exile every survivor you come across, but it might hurt your macro pressure since it's so easily undone compared to Pyramid Head, who's just the equivalent of cages, which is why I find the Judgment so much more interesting than Pyramid Head in this case, even though they're not even out yet. Like, all of this could suddenly just be changed in the PTB. And I'm like, oh, this is such great design. And then they change it to just be exactly like Pyramid Head's cages, and I'm just gonna be like super pissed. But there's that. And then there's also the discussion of like, should you even hook survivors? Not hook. Should you even exile survivors, or should you hook them so that they stay infected with sin? Because exiling a survivor will cleanse them of sin. And if you don't know what sin does, sin is a debuff that, if put into the dying state, allows you to exile them. I already mentioned this. But it also makes it so that if a survivor hits a good skill check, instead of progressing the generator, it regresses the generator. Which I think is the only instance where like a killer power is able to affect the survivor's abilities to do generators without the use of add-ons. I think Freddy has like the dress add-ons that allow him to like mess with skill checks and like how survivors do them. But like, I think this is the only case where a killer has like a direct slowdown effect on generators, just base kit. Which, already pretty interesting on its own, but because of this, and because of the fact that the exile does not activate killer perks like Pop Goes the Weasel or Turn Back the Clock, you're met with an interesting dilemma. Do you exile the survivor so that you don't have to worry about anti-tunnel perks, you don't have to worry about the time sink it takes to pick up and hook them, you don't have to worry about pallet saves, or do you hook them so that you can take advantage of your own perks and take advantage of the sin debuff? Because realistically, you're not going to be able to inflict sin onto survivors without hooking them unless you're like really good at cross-mapping them, which can easily be mitigated with like perks like Hive Mind, so that you just have like perfect information on the generators to just snipe them with it. But it's interesting. I think the play style most people are going to gravitate towards is sort of a mix between like exiling and hooking survivors, primarily to avoid the issue I was talking about earlier, where if you hook multiple survivors, like your macro pressure disappears in like an instant, because all it takes is one survivor interacting with a shrine to save everyone. So what's probably going to happen is like the Judgment exiles the first survivor they come across, and then they hook like the second person while they're in the empowered state. That's also another thing. Exiling survivors empowers you, which allows you to currently, this might change by the time the Judgment goes live, but going off of the community live stream a while back, they said that the empowered state will allow you to curve the Ray of Retribution after it's fired, similar to like Hillbilly's Chainsaw. And with that, being able to do that as a killer... fuck. I lost my train of thought. Being able to do... with the empowered state, depending on how the empowered state works, whether it is a... whether the empowered state is like on a timer, similar to Plague's Corrupt Purge, or if it's like you are empowered so long as a survivor is in exile, it's going to be very interesting to see how the Judgment works. Because if it's on like a 30-second timer, let's say, you exile a survivor, 30 seconds pass, that survivor is still in exile, it might be better to risk instantly losing like all of the pressure you have from having a survivor on exile to exile a second survivor. That way you can enter your empowered state again, rather than just like hooking them for the sin. But if like the timer's like a minute, maybe even like a minute 30 seconds, chances are, if someone's still in exile while you're in the empowered state, chances are, whenever you like down another survivor, you're still going to be in the empowered state after exiling someone. So it's just going to be better to like pick up and hook them than trying to exile them again to like refresh your empowered state. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the Judgment plays, is the big TLDR of this, honestly. And I cannot wait to get my hands on this killer.